problem is that I don't even have the answer to how, because you also have to look at, where you're at. We're in Las Vegas. There's everything here. It's completely different compared to LA, the hood in LA. Even though they're a metro area, LA also has their different problems, and I've seen both. Montana, the kids in Montana are completely different. Like, you just never know, but leverage the people that are around you, and they still have talents. And if you stop talking about them like they don't exist, or bashing them like they're talentless because all they do is focus on social media, then we're not going to raise a generation. We're not going to switch the generation to actually do what they are called to do or leverage their talents, because we're focusing on the 25 years that they're spending on their phone. Then let's switch it. Let's do our best to change this epidemic. Let's do our best to influence and overpower the algorithm, if you will, and put more positive stuff on there. And I don't know, I think it's just crazy when I think about it that we need to do more, and there's so many things that we can do, but the problem is that there is so much more that we need to do, when I feel like a part of it could have been prevented a little bit if we actually cared enough.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the HR Heroes podcast. I'm here with Miss Cynthia Perez. Cynthia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh man, this has been a long time in the making,
Yeah, several months, I think, at this point, maybe a month. I don't know, time goes by
it does.
fast.
When we connected originally, I wanted to be able to talk to you because of your lived experience in the HR space, but also your lived experience as a human. Because you've had your own issues with mental health. And when we connected on our original conversation, you were such an advocate for showing up and creating a safe space for others. And so I really want to dive into that. But before we do that, I have a humanistic question to ask you. Yeah. How's your heart doing today?
That's a very deep question. I think my heart's a little bit heavy in the sense because, as we're talking about mental health, I'm seeing it. I think we've seen it in the news recently with, a pro golfer, and then we're also hearing it. It's in the last 2 days of Mental Health Month, but I've heard a lot more people choosing to end their life, unfortunately. And it's been weighing on my heart a little bit lately, which is why I think this conversation is so important. But it's heavy, but it's hopeful at the same time.
I mean, it's really sad to kind of think about an individual like that golfer, right? Yeah. Hearing how he ended up dying by suicide and thinking about his situation, it kind of puts everybody on an even playing field. Does that make sense? Because it seems like he had all the resources, he had all the opportunities, people around him who cared, but he still was in such a dark place where he decided that he didn't want to be here anymore. Yeah. And that's just like a tragedy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the stigmas that we talk about it so much, it's a topic of conversation, but I don't think it's talked about enough, and actually people mean it. And so it's one of those things where go get help, suicide hotline, all of these different things. And like you said, everyone has all the resources. There are even free resources out there, but it's just hard that you have to look for them. But on top of that, though, it's like you never understand the voices in someone's mind, which, of course, in my experience, I can totally relate. But at the same time, it's hard to explain that mindset where you can talk to a therapist, and a therapist has been there for you, and, their job is there to support you. But it's still very hard in the process to find someone who gets it. And, I don't know what the reasoning is. I follow big people, Chesley Christ, her mom, April, just recently released her book. And, Chesley had everything. She was an attorney. She had everything under the sun. And she was very vocal about her mental health with her mom, who was her best friend. And yet, look what happened, unfortunately, in January of last year. And it's you just never know. And you can't say that you've necessarily lived it because you're not in that person's head. And I think, it's talked about, but really how are we approaching it? And so that's where my heart is at, is I don't know what that guy, he had everything, he did admit to his struggles. He was very vocal about it, but how was he treated? You know, like, did someone have in the back of their mind, like, you have everything, so there's nothing to feel sorry for?
Yeah.
Like those types of things. And so I think that's where I can relate to, where it's like, you know, you're given the basics, you know, you have a roof over your head, you have all of this stuff, but then what else do you need? And so there's a lot more, you know, to that, but it's a very, very hitting thing where you can live in the hood, like where I grew up, to, you know, be the child of the richest person in the world and still say, forget it.
I mean, it's heartbreaking to think about because, yes, we are incredibly lucky. But like you said, we're never really aware of what's going on in somebody else's head. And sometimes I feel like we're all fighting these silent fights because even like social media today is a very interesting concept because everybody's their best PR manager. They always put out the happy moments, the celebrations, the victories, but nobody actually, I guess, because we're so distracted today with the next thing or the next emotion of like validation, that we often don't kind of think about reaching out to other people. And I feel like that's where conversations like this are so valuable because we can have a conversation that is honest and open and other people feel the same way. Yeah. Why do you feel like it's so tough for so many people to even kind of reach out for help in the moments where they feel like the darkest and they need the most support, but it's easy for us to kind of like, you know, pull away from others in those moments?
I think it really just depends. I know for myself, it was really hard because of the upbringing that I had. You know, I grew up in a Christian, you know, Christian Catholic background where you either prayed away or, you know, even when my mom grew up, my mom grew up in a household where psychology wasn't even a thing. And as long as you had your basic needs met, as long as you had your family, that was it. Or, you know, you just repressed everything that you were really feeling, and because everyone else did it, you move on. But to your point, we live in an age where everything is accessible, and that can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing. I think that there is a huge, huge stigma where someone will say that they are there for you, but it's like, they're there for me, but I'm nervous about the response that I'm going to receive. I think the stigma around even the hotlines that are there, sometimes it's like, and I can actually share this, you know, years ago, I've actually utilized one of those hotlines and I felt that it was impersonal in a sense, because it's like, okay, your job is to study me, your job is to hear keywords that I'm stating, or, you know, whatever the case may be. And I don't feel like it's me. And then also on top of that, from a social media perspective, let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's have a conversation. Let's do it. But then when I have a conversation, you know, like sharing, hey, my heart is tough, my heart is heavy. Well, what do you think is triggering it? I don't know. Well, there must be a reason. Not necessarily. And I think we're afraid to have these deep conversations because we don't know how to take it. We don't know how someone's going to react, despite how they say that they love us, despite that they say that they care. You know, finding a good therapist is also hard nowadays. Yeah. You can seek the help, but it's like going on a dating app at the same time, where it, you know, do we mesh together? And I can say going to therapy since I was 18, you know, 12 years now, depending on your insurance, it's a fight. You have to like go through all these different things. Then a stage happens in your life where, like for me, I needed to find someone that knew postpartum depression, going on my cycle again, moving to LA, like all of those different things. And so I think there's many different reasons, but ultimately it just boils down to who can I trust, who can actually say that they relate, who can, you know, am I going to be judged for it? Because despite what people say at my employer or whatever the case may be, they say that they care, but do they really? And then you also have these people on the flip side that say that they care, but truly they just don't.
Yeah.
They say that they do just for say that I care. This is another cause that I support. But then back of their minds, they're just complaining about this person that's so negative or whatever the case may be, or there's no reason why they should be depressed. They have it all, right? And so you can hear so much because of social media, and everything is in your ear at the same time, not just one person like there was in the past. So,
I mean, it's just a really tough time, especially when we look at kind of the overwhelming need for mental health support today. It's something that's very close to my heart, because when I first started our business back in 2014, we were looking at the landscape of Nevada, and we were saying, there's a ton of people who don't have access to a mental health professional because we live in this valley, if you will. Yeah. There are so many communities that are out there. And so we started trying to tell people that they can use like virtual communication. Is that how you normally go to therapy, or do you do like a sit down? Or are you kind of like...
I do a mix of both.
Okay.
I mean, virtual, like I like to talk to a person. It really just depends on who the individual is.
Yeah.
Me lately, I've been gravitating towards being a busy mother, and I can get a lot more out in a text than I can, just by talking out loud.
Yeah.
So it really just depends, I guess, on the season for myself.
Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that our mental health is not just a static thing.
Yeah.
Right. We have experiences in life that take us in different directions. We have emotions. We're chemical beings. And you think about how everything is kind of released inside of us. I know that early in your professional career, to kind of get onto the HR side, you had an experience working here at Best Buy.
Yep.
And I really think it's important for you to be able to share that, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
To be able to share kind of what your experience was and how kind of a leader showed up in that moment and kind of created the safe space to ask you, how can we tackle this challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in 2014, I was with Best Buy for, I want to say, 3.5 years. And when I was a kid growing up, like, it was either going to church or, going to work. I was involved in everything. And then when I worked at Best Buy, my team really invested in me. My leaders were the best that I've ever seen. Like, granted, it was my first big girl job, but, from day one, I felt like I was a part of the family. And I know that right now that's very stigmatized. But when I say I felt like I was a part of the family, I was just a high school 17-year-old when I started there. And people treated me like their little sister, and they invested in me. I, was employee engagement captain. I really cared about people. And the fact that I was in an environment that gave me the ability to care about others, and despite that we were at work, to actually create that space for other people, because they did that for me. But I was going through a really, really, really rocky point that I didn't even understand or comprehend. I had suicidal ideations before, but this time it really hit home that if I did not move to Arizona, I was getting ready to go to Grand Canyon University. If I did not move to Arizona sooner, I wouldn't be here. And I was struggling a lot. My leaders knew. But this one manager, he was my direct manager, and I texted him. And I remember I was sitting inside, like at a park, just by myself. And I told him, if I don't leave, like within the next 2 weeks, you're not going to have me here. And not going to cry. It was my heart. I was just a young girl going through some stuff, very active in the church, doing all of that. But I remember texting him, and he's like, we'll do whatever we can to support you. And I remember going into the office and, talking to him, and he gave me the biggest hug ever. And even now, even though we're not as connected before, if I didn't move to Arizona earlier, I probably wouldn't be here. And it's crazy because it's like, how is it a local Las Vegas girl who has been here her whole life, very comfortable? How is it moving somewhere that is very uncomfortable, where I knew no one? How does that make sense? And I really needed to be explanted from the environment that caused the pain, that caused the heartache, and that I was already in circles to actually figure it out, which I know is contradictory to an extent, because I didn't know anyone. However, that was one of the best decisions that was made. And I remember coming to visit him and, always texting me, making sure that I was okay. Did I move okay? Am I okay? Am I fine? How's my mental health? Like, for the first 1.5 years, it was literally constant checking up on me. And I lived there for 4 years. But other leaders that I spoke to there, like, every single day, it didn't feel like work to me, because I was surrounded by people that actually cared. I knew what EAP was and I shared with it. Like, I did all the right things. I partnered with HR, even before this whole thing happened. I did all the right things that I still encourage employers to share with their employees now. And so I did all the right steps that I was supposed to do, but that didn't really, I wouldn't say it didn't mean anything, but it just shows that you can have all the resources in the world, and sometimes you just need to make a move or a change to help. And if it wasn't for them actually caring more about my well-being rather than someone covering for the shift, or they haven't filled my spot yet or anything like that, that meant so much more to me and is the reason why I'm here today. And so it shows too that it just takes a thoughtful conversation and for you to actually sit down and genuinely care whether you want kids or not. If that's your child, like, how would you treat the situation? And still till this day, as much, even though I'm no longer with Best Buy, I see Best Buy as one of the top companies still for that reason. Because even later on, I've had so many experiences after the fact. Met the CEO at the time, like all of those different things. It's because of the leaders, not just from where I was, but even from the top down, that made moves to care about me as a human being. Even though they have a ton of employees, that decision trickles to one, and they understood that. And so because of that, I take it everywhere with me, no matter what.
I mean, isn't it amazing how one person can create the safe space for you and actually show up as an individual? And that means so much more than the pay, the job, the benefits, the EAP access, everything like that. And I feel like, especially over the last years, it seems like we've lost our way. Because I had another guy on the podcast, and I love to shout him out. His name was Chris Gillett. And he said something really profound. It was so simple. He said, Keenan, before there was DE&I, before there was HR, before there was EAP programs, there were human beings who cared. And sometimes we just need to lean back into that as a business strategy, because I think in today's world, although we're hyper connected and we have the opportunities for so many people to check in on us, it seems like we're more lonely than ever. And it seems like one of the best ways that you can support people is just by showing up. You know what I mean? It's just like such a simple concept that I feel like we've lost kind of sight of. Why do you feel like the last couple of years, especially, it seems like we've lost the human nature of business?
Well, I think, COVID took a big part in that, where it was like, oh, you don't need human connection to do it. Now, granted, understandably, the pandemic and everything, and for a lot of people, the remote work environment works. But then I also think that we've enhanced the internet so much, like it's a catch-22.
Yeah.
Where it's like, now we're so used to being in our bubble. I mean, I work remotely and I've, done it for several years, so I get it. And I'm a human nature person. I like to be around people, which is why I get out of the house as much as I possibly can. Even if I'm not talking to someone, if I'm saying hi to the cashier, I'm going to say hi. I'm going to make that person's day, whatever the case may be. I take advantage of those opportunities. But for some, they need that person, not necessarily to look over their shoulder, but they actually need someone to genuinely care and just be there. I guess the water cooler talks.
Yeah.
Like those things were it really seems like, oh, that's in the past or whatever. But sometimes you could say something just by having that water cooler talk, and you never know the impact that it made on that person. Even though it's something simple, the fact that you're having a good day and they're probably not, but you said something, it's those simple things. And I think we've lost sight of that. I think from a business perspective, we're now so focused on maybe recovering from what happened during COVID, or we're so focused on just productivity that we lose sight of the humans that do the work. I can tell you right now, my primary state that I support is the beautiful state of California. And we all know that there's a lot going on, but there's a lot going on from a federal perspective even too. And something as simple as sick time, something as simple as bereavement leave. California just released their reproductive loss leave. it's crazy how I hear a mixed situation between the employers, especially when the reproductive loss leave came about, is that why do I have to support an employee? I remember an employer saying this. Why do I have to support an employee who lost their baby or who miscarried? And you're hearing that, like, not just, from conversation with clients or whatever. It's like, people are like, these politicians don't know what they're talking about, da, 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 da. And it's like, well, it's because employers are not doing it on their own willingly, because you're caring more so about how this person needs to be at the desk, and you're caring more so about the quality, but they're not going to produce quality when they're suffering from a loss.
100%.
And so, that's why they also mandate bereavement leave. There's a lot of things that, as much as it can be frustrating for employers in California, the problem is that they have to enact these to be able to support their employees and to be able to support the workforce. Now, all of that aside, it's like employers shouldn't have to do things or wait for a law to be passed in order to provide guidance and support. And I think the longer that employers wait, either A, for a law or don't do it on their own, we're going to see more issues. You can have EAP all day long. I love EAP. I think EAP is amazing. But when someone says that I need to take some time because right now my mental health's okay, and they're not eligible for FMLA, for example, they've been there for 6 months or so, or, they need to go on bereavement, but let's say the bereavement policy is very specific and they're requiring certain things, but it's a family member that is not necessarily a family member. We all have our brothers and sisters that are not actually family, right? Like blood related. You shouldn't have to ask for proof of that. Like, you're suffering. And right now it's frustrating because employers are still doing that, and employers have created an environment that is tough to be human. And with COVID, it's crazy because I thought we would have been at the opposite too, where so many people died from COVID, but we're backtracking. There was a law that, back then we had to provide support for employees with COVID, whatever the case may be, but because they had to.
It seems like I had a guy who we talked to on the podcast, and he said, Keenan, if you change the incentives, you change the results. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the incentives are so ass backwards today that we're getting terrible results on the other side. And it's interesting to me that we're at the point in time where, one of the things that we talk about on the podcast a lot is a lot of organizations today are seeing a lot of like unionization within their organizations. And I was talking to this guy the other day, and he was like, it's so interesting to me because I grew up in the 80s and I saw how unions were super prevalent then. It seemed like we got away from that time, but now this new generation is pushing unions again. Yep. And my reaction to that was, do you feel like the world in itself has become so individualized that it seems like everybody has lost their feeling of agency? Meaning we can impact our world around us. And when it comes down to your employer not standing up and doing the right things for you, the government has to stand up and be like, this is a mandate now. And it's so interesting to me that people are going to throw a fit about having to support an employee for being human because we're so focused on the wrong incentives to get the wrong type of results. Isn't that a crazy time to be in?
It's insane because people are and this is where generational gaps also come into play, because people are so focused on what happened in the past.
Yep.
And they're so focused on, well, mental health wasn't really a thing back then. Well, yeah, like, again, the catch-22 with social media, it's great because you have imposter syndrome it's great for good reasons, but imposter syndrome is very heavy. Mm-hmm. And so easy, even me for myself sometimes, I'm like, I'm 30 years old, and then you see this YouTuber that I'm like, man, they're younger than me and they're making it big. It's so easy to do that. And it takes really tough mental space to do that, but it's so hard because you also have to realize who you surround yourself with. And sometimes for some people that's not easy. And then, other in that generation too, we can live without social media. We can live without this. We can live without that. But sometimes that's how people communicate only. My dad, for example, he was on Facebook for maybe 2 weeks. And then we moved to LA, and he originally had an Android phone then, and he's union. I'm a union baby, so I get it. But he got an iPhone when we moved to LA because he's like, I'm not going to get on Facebook like everybody else when people move out of town. I'm just going to convert to iPhone. And so I thought that was hilarious. But, you know, you can easily say, well, don't use social media then. We didn't have social media back in the day. Okay, well, we're moving ahead.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it's like people are unionizing because they realized, people are not getting paid as well as they should be. Back in the past, if we can, you know, look at all the inflation rates, everything, what it takes for families. I think I saw a post the other day where for a family of 4 to live comfortably, it's like a family has to have $294,000 to make. And I'm like, so am I lower class or am I middle class? Like, what am I considered? And I'm a family of 4.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I do well. And so people are not looking at the data. They're not looking at what they wish that they had back then either. Like, do you wish that you had someone that supported you? Like how, and if it did well, okay, what did they do right? And if they, I guess I wouldn't say if they yelled at you and that's how you got to do what you needed to do, was that okay? Like, can you actually say that was okay?
Right.
So it's like, there's the generational gap. And then you also have people on our generation, the hustle culture, and that if I did it, well, there's definitely nothing that can stop you. But then let's look at the mental health gap too. If you have this, then maybe you should just pause, you know, like maybe you should just wait. And I've had that said to me before where you're a mom now. You can, you know, let your career wait a few years, or like, there's no way that you can do this now that you're a parent. And it's like, well, what's wrong with being a mom? Like, you know, and sometimes there's a fear out there now. Again, another law that was just enacted, the Pregnancy Protection Act, but from a federal perspective, already done in California and a few other states, where I apply for a job and I'm like, let's say I'm not showing yet, but I have a fear that the second that I get hired, I tell you that I'm pregnant and you're going to look at me the wrong way because now I'm going to ask for leave here in a few months or whatever the case may be. And so that's the problem, is that we're also in a hustle culture, which is totally fine. I should definitely believe you should work hard for, you know, to earn what you want and what you want to get out of life. But there's an extent. And if we were not punishing people back then for having families, why are we doing that now? And then on top of that, you know, if people need more to take care of themselves, why aren't we doing that? Why do you don't want a union to be, having a union costs a lot of money to the employer. And so save some time now. It's not a smart business decision. Here in Las Vegas, it's completely different. But still costs the casinos a lot of money. But at the same time, if just a cafe, like, really, do you really want to go through that battle? But people just want to be angry and they want to fight for what? You know, that's how I look at it, is like, you have to choose your pros and your cons, and either you're just really hard-headed and you're set in your ways. Eventually you're going to figure out the consequences.
Yeah. I mean, it's so difficult for me to kind of sit back and look where we're going, because it seems like we're steering ourselves towards a cliff and everybody's so busy bickering inside the car back and forth that we're not really paying attention in the direction in which we're headed. And I really worry about, you know, this younger generation, especially when it comes to the overexposure to things like social media. There was a really interesting study that was done. The psychiatrist studied like 650,000 middle school and high school students. And he was talking about the inflection point of when social media was introduced in like 2012, like 9% of girls had major depressive episodes. As of the most recent data in 2023, 31% of girls have depressive episodes. And he was like, let's kind of look at the timeline here and look what actually occurred. 2012, social media comes out, and then every single year it's been stacking up. And it was a very interesting argument, because in this study, he asked the question, how many of you use technology? Everybody raised their hand. How many of you use Netflix? Everybody raised their hand. Do you ever wish that platform was never invented? Nobody raised their hand. Do you guys use Instagram or TikTok? Everybody raised their hand. Do you wish that platform was never invented? Everybody raised their hand. And he said, why? He said, because I feel like I'm inferior. I feel like I'm always comparing myself to other people. I feel like I'm always being judged. So why don't you guys hop off the platform and not use social media like the example that we talked about? And they said, well, if I'm not on it, all my other friends are going to be on it. And I don't want to be left out. And what happens if someone says something about me? And so it's like technology in itself has us in this like vice grip of, it's almost like an abusive relationship. And we keep coming back over and over again, looking for the good days. And we're hoping for that time, but it seems like it's never coming. And so it's like, I don't even think we truly understand the impacts of social media on the younger generation. And so what's going to happen to this incredible crisis that we're in for mental health support? Because like you're talking about, only a few amount of therapists in the world, more and more people need support. It's so difficult to get in to see somebody today. So how do we kind of tackle these challenges? I don't know, unless we start at like a grassroots level where we start being like, hey, Cynthia, are you okay? I really just want to check in on you. Family, can we have this conversation? It seems like that's the only way to get out of this.
I mean, I could definitely relate to the, young girl situation. When I first got my phone, I was 15 and there was nothing like that. We would just text back and forth.
Do you remember those days? Those were the good days.
Those were the good days where the only people that you had to compare yourself to were the people in school.
Yeah.
That was it. And I remember my first Instagram post. Even then, I didn't have anyone to compare it to because I was still living life. I wasn't scrolling on my phone that much unless I was texting someone. And I fear for my kids. If we do not shift things soon, then, I fear for that generation. And if people are not actually looking at it from a bigger perspective, like we need to open our eyes. I talked to my husband and we talk about this when it comes down to raising our kids. Even though they're not at that age yet where they can have a phone, having a 1-year-old and a 6-year-old, it's completely different. But still, that stuff is coming up. Like I see kids that are 8 years old and have phones. It's one thing to be able to communicate to the right people, to emergency contacts, whatever. But you're also parents also need to be the ones to truly make the decision and raise their children and have these tough conversations. The fact that because of social media, that we're having to have these big old serious conversations because a parent not doing their job to their kids.
This is really interesting to me because I feel like in society, it's so easy for us to be able to cast blame, if you will. So a great example is, in our generation, we caught a lot of flack because they're like, you guys grew up with 8th place trophies. You guys did all this type of stuff. And my question to come back to that is like, but who bought those 8th place trophies? Because I wasn't the 5-year-old or the 8-year-old going into the store and saying, I need an 8th place trophy. So like there's a sense of accountability that comes along with parenting that I feel like more people need to start taking on as a personal responsibility.
That's why I fear, my husband was a school aide here at one of the elementary schools on, the east side. And the stuff that I hear, and it's crazy to think that this is our generation that is the next level of parents.
Yep.
And it's like, my kid can do no wrong. My kid can do this. Do they do wrong at home and are you yelling at them? Are you getting frustrated with them at home? Because if they can do that at home, then they can do that here. Are you actually giving them the attention that they need? Because as a mom, that's what, I will fully take responsibility of both my kids' actions. Now, granted, I know that I also know my kids at the same time. Like there's a point where you can defend, but even now, like my daughter's favorite show is Bluey. And that's one of the things that we are totally okay with letting her watch because there's true life lessons there. But then there's other people that are creating content that are exposing kids like my daughter. They know that they have phones and they're sharing these things they shouldn't even know until they're adults. And so you're creating, or even in high school, like you're creating this comparison trap for younger kids and it's just getting worse and worse. And it's like us as the parents, I think of DARE, the DARE program. Yeah. This is what social media is becoming. But the thing is that I don't remember in DARE us talking about the severe psychological effects about it. We talked about the bodily effects.
Yep.
But we're not talking about really what it can do. Didn't know what suicide was back then. Now, how many times are we hearing, parents, this is something that grapples me, is that we as parents need to take responsibility for having these tough conversations. Even now, when I'm having a tough day, my mental health is off and on. It's been that way for a while now, totally, and I'm very transparent with it. And if I'm having a tough time, rather than lashing out at my child, or even if I accidentally do, my 6-year-old, I don't want her to feel like she's responsible for that emotion. So I take a step back and I go to her and I'm like, I'm so sorry. And I apologize and I explain. And in our house, we've utilized the term brain farts because it's pretty much what's happening. You don't know, like, you don't understand. And it's like in social media, we're utilizing big concepts that not everyone will understand. And it's so frustrating to me. Like, I use social media like crazy, but I have veered off of who I watch, and I know intelligently who I'm going to skip and all that stuff. Sometimes I take a break, but it takes willpower. And I feel for that 9-year-old girl who mommy and daddy are on TikTok or on Instagram. And so she's going to be on it too. And I think I remember hearing one of the episodes, one of your guests, you guys were talking about like, everyone at the table, you guys are alone together. It's true. You guys are like, we're all in our heads, and we give ourselves that space. So I think we need to go back to setting boundaries and putting our phones away and, taking the time, like something that I've been trying to do, but on Sundays, I don't want to communicate with anyone except for, my kids or family time. That's it. Turning it off, put my phone on do not disturb. I heard this from another creator where her and her husband, they do that. They have like a bin where at night, every single night when they go to bed, they put their phones away. And then same thing for one whole day, they don't do anything on it, and they limit who they follow, all of those different things. And so we need to get back to those roots where it's like, we don't have phones. How many times do you see kids playing outside unless they have to?
They don't. I mean, even the system, and I think about the fact that my sister has 2 stepkids who are like 11 and 9 years old, very young, and they don't even have recess anymore. So like, they don't even let these kids outside to go run around and be kids. And she was talking about one time what happens at like these school functions. Instead of kids being kids and talking to each other, what are they all doing? Sitting on their phones. And it's like, it's an incredibly scary experience to think about. But going back to your point, you have to have a lot of willpower and also the ability to audit yourself. And I get scared because all generations are exposed to TikTok today. I can't tell you how many times my dad sends me TikToks and stuff like that. And I don't have it on my phone because I realize that it literally just drains my energy, but also makes the days accelerate. And it's like an interesting perspective of how these tools were designed. They were designed to be social networks. And what we've seen is the progression of these platforms into tools that are designed by incredibly smart psychologists, behavioral scientists, and data people to keep us coming back to this platform.
Yeah.
And so it's like, unless you can truly understand that because these platforms are free, you technically are the product, you really don't have the ability to understand what's happening. Another thing that I think is really interesting, do you track screen time on your phone? Okay. So a really sobering activity is if you look at your screen time, you can go to a website called Lifetime Screen Time Calculator. You put in your age and your average screen time, and it extrapolates how much time you're going to spend on your device for the rest of your life.
Wow.
The average 18-year-old kid today spends 9 hours on their device. If you extrapolate that out for the rest of their life, guess how much time they're going to spend looking at their phone?
Well, it has to be in the millions for sure. Probably
25 years of the rest of their life is going to be spent on their device. And if you think about kind of the accountability to live your best life, if you waste 25 years of it looking at a feed and other people who are across the world who don't know and don't care about you, and you kind of emotionally invest into that, it's an incredibly scary thing to think about. What happens when we're 60, when we're 70, and we look back and we're like, we didn't even do anything because I've been literally just like facelessly looking at this thing. It's just so scary.
Yeah, it's very scary. And I think going back to, this is something that supporting employers too, I always get the young generation all the time talk. And I'm sitting here as the young generation providing them guidance, And I think a part of it is there's a lot that people can do to influence the right way. But it takes someone with the willpower to be willing to change, to also go that direction. For me, my dad's a gamer, still is a gamer. He's very proud of it. I grew up with computers in my house. I grew up with, IM and all of that fun stuff. But I also was forced to play outside. I wouldn't say forced to do extracurriculars. I was just a nerd. All of those different things, everything under the sun, I did it. But the willpower of my parents with not giving in to what the world was doing really helped me a lot. Now, granted, I use social media consistently. Don't get me wrong. But when I'm at work, even though I work from home, my phone is on, but do not disturb mode is there like crazy because I have to focus. And I have ADHD too. And I have to do things around me to make sure that I focus, whether that's, treadmill, whatever. And so on top of all of that, where employers can provide support is, if you want to complain about the young generation, they have all of these things, but what can you do to help mitigate that? Like, talk to them. What can help? If you're going to be on social media, okay, you have to work, but are they using social media as a tool, as an employer, to be engaging? Are they doing something to be relevant? Maybe, some of these young kids can have ideas because they're engaging in all these things. So you have to use it more intelligently. But on top of that, it's how many people, yourselves, how many people are on social media actually trying to fight this whole thing and trying to prevent this from happening? Not just influencing their day-to-day, what they do. I've tried that on TikTok, as well myself, and then I had to stop it because I not only have severe imposter syndrome, but I felt like I was trying to be so much like everybody else that I followed that I'm not at the right place. If I wanted to be in a place of influence at this stage where I'm at right now, I had to recognize that I'm trying so hard to be somebody and not me. I'm authentic, but at the same time, you're recording and you do 10 different takes, and then it feels ungenuine when you're going through something. But here's the thing, though, is that employers can leverage people that are on social media, see what they're posting, and see what these kids are looking at, and address those types of conversations, take interest. And even if you don't care about it, you know who this person follows, why do you follow them? Oh, you can probably identify too someone's interest based off of the influencers that they follow. 100%. You love coffee.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, not like I'm stalking you or anything like that, but try to figure the human aspect of it. Leverage this, because a part of it is how they communicate right now. And if you can leverage it in a good way, while the world is trying to do the opposite, then we'd be in a better place. The problem is that I don't even have the answer to how, because you also have to look at, where you're at. We're in Las Vegas. There's everything here. It's completely different compared to LA, the hood in LA. Even though they're a metro area, LA also has their different problems, and I've seen both. Montana, the kids in Montana are completely different. You just never know, but leverage the people that are around you, and they still have talents. And if you stop talking about them like they don't exist, or bashing them like they're talentless because all they do is focus on social media, then we're not going to raise a generation. We're not going to switch the generation to actually do what they are called to do or leverage their talents, because we're focusing on the 25 years that they're spending on their phone. Then let's switch it. Let's do our best to change this epidemic. Let's do our best to influence and overpower the algorithm, if you will, and put more positive stuff on there. And I don't know, I think it's just crazy when I think about it that we need to do more, and there's so many things that we can do. But the problem is that there is so much more that we need to do, when I feel like a part of it could have been prevented a little bit if we actually cared enough.
There's an interesting topic that we talk about a lot is the rate in which technology progresses is exponential, but the way in which society progresses doesn't go at that same exponential rate. And so it's like we have technology that's kind of running away in our lives, and like AI is a conversation right now that I have a lot about, or I talk a lot about. And it's like we don't even truly understand the way in which these technologies are impacting our life. Because they're just like on a runaway ski or runaway train, runaway tracks, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it's just like an interesting time to kind of be in our generation specifically, because I feel like we were born in the before time and we saw the evolution of technology kind of consume us, and it's just had amazing impacts on our life. But where's the element of like accountability, to kind of go back to this? Because it's so easy for our older generation to judge and say, you guys, you don't do this right. You didn't do these things. You know, you guys are all so soft, as an example. You guys are on social media all the time. But what about the element of taking ownership, like you said, and trying to meet people in the middle? Because I feel like one of the topics that I really want to talk about in here, which is the 12 and a half book that I referenced in our previous call, was the role of empathy.
Yeah.
It seems like we don't have the ability to empathize with other people today. Do you feel like that's because we're always on to the next thing, or do you feel like we're so focused on ourselves, or why do you feel like we've lost that?
I think we don't want to admit that we did something wrong.
Yeah, man, preach.
I feel like we don't want to take accountability because it means it looks bad on us. When in reality, what we're looking for is responsibility, because in my experience, I'm not sure if I shared this with you before, but when I was diagnosed with my anxiety and depression, I had to wait till I was 18 years old to sign for myself to go see a psychiatrist, because even though I've been griping at it, my parents, when I was 11 and on, going through all these struggles, I knew I had it. And the day on my 18th birthday, I called and I made that appointment. I was diagnosed a month and a half later. I took that paper and I shoved it in my dad's face because I was so emotional about it. And I was very frustrated because I was like, I couldn't just pray this away. I couldn't just shove this aside. Just because you gave me a roof over my head and let me do everything that I wanted doesn't mean you were there for me. And that was a really tough conversation to have. And I'm all for having tough conversations. It's painful, but they need to be said. And doing that, now my father and I'm one of the lucky ones. My father and I have a really great relationship now, and he takes those things seriously, and he has taken accountability. Till this day, there are moments where my father will still apologize, which is crazy. I'm very lucky to have that. But here's the thing. I'm one of the very few. And the problem is that, sure, back then, these are not the same problems. They weren't back then. But then again, people need to look at what even that generation created. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, didn't they help create this technology that all of us use today?
100%.
And so it's like, take accountability, but also just because you were able to have this, pay attention to what's going on around me. Like, isn't that your job as a parent? And even if you don't have kids, like, whatever's around you, did you not actually see? You guys were afraid of Y2K. You guys were afraid. 2012, we were afraid of the end of the world. Like, we're all so focused on this and all the bad stuff, but what are you really focusing on? And the problem is that we have too much pride to take the accountability that we were focusing on the wrong things, because we can only do right. No one likes to be called out on their mess, myself included. I hate it, but it's the willingness to change. And here's the thing, this is probably going to get into something else, but I am a firm believer in cutting the weeds out from, like, no contact with people. I don't care if you're family or not. If you are not willing to acknowledge the pain that I'm still working through, and the pain that you could still be causing because you refuse to change your behaviors, then fine, I'm going to cut you out. If we have to do that with friends that are no good to us, then why can't we do that with family? But the thing is, though, is that, I grew up I'm half Hispanic. My dad's side is German and on my mom's side, I have like a million cousins and all of that stuff. I don't even know half of my cousins' names, but there are a few family members that, because they were not good for my mental health and were not empathetic to my situation, I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to cut you out. Full-blown confidence, even till this day. But the thing is that I had the willpower to do that, and it's not easy for some people. Some people depend on those family members too, whether it's with kids or financially, whatever the case may be. So what needs to happen is, we need to start owning up, and we need to start thinking of what kind of person did we wish was in our life, or who was your favorite person? For me, it was like my grandma. My grandma, no matter, you could do no wrong, even though if you did the worst thing in the world, she would give you the best hug in the world. And she passed last September. And one of the things that I told, my sister and I will talk about it, we miss my grandparents' hugs, because even when we felt like we did the worst thing imaginable, they made sure that we knew it was okay. And they also apologized. And the thing is that like, we're not doing that enough. Like, who is that example for you? And who can you, if you choose not to, but you want to change, then cut those people out. Like,
That's an incredibly scary process for people, though. I mean,
I
feel the exact same way. And I always talk about, there are friendships that are in your life for a season, and there are other people who are in there for a reason. And it seems like we have gotten to a place where we're scared to have some of those tough conversations with people. And so I really resonate with you when you say you're willing to have those tough conversations, because you can either suffer from the idea of a conversation forever, or you can have it one time and it's over. And if those people don't align with you, then yeah, you do have to have the accountability to yourself to cut those people off, because a life worth living is you being happy and it's being supported. And it's not something that a lot of people have the bravery to do, though.
No. And I think, it's definitely not easy, especially when you have reliance, or like they're all that
Yeah.
And it's, and I can definitely understand that. For me, it was being raised around my mom's family pretty much every time we would do a get together and whatever the case may be. And it's like, at some point as I got older, I realized, I had goals, and so-and-so's birthday wasn't superior to the goal that I had at the time, or to the friendships that I wanted to foster. It's nothing against them. Like, if you're happy continuing with this behavior and your life is great, but it's not helping me at all. And the older generation will say, well, that's so selfish of you. Well, I have to be.
100%. Totally agree.
Like, you have to be. And the thing is that to, the overall topic of mental health, the problem is, too, that I think is huge, is that sometimes the voices that are inside our heads are magnified by the people that are around us that belittle us for trying to make those big, tough decisions. We see it everywhere where, you tell your kids, or you tell someone that, believe in yourself, do whatever, you want to do. But then it's those people that believe in us that are telling us, hey, it's probably not the best idea. You're not great at this, or you're not great at that. And it's like, you kind of have to pick and choose, and it's hard. But the way that I like to see it, it wasn't easy for me in the beginning. I just was around the right people that did it. My leaders at Best Buy, for example, that did similar things, that had similar upbringings than I did. And I got, lucky in that sense, and I stuck it out. And I was more, and still am, I consider more chosen family, my family, more than anything. You're in my circle, like,
because
hey,
I
we're
want
great.
you to be here.
Yeah, you've impacted my life. Like, let's be honest, relationships are selfish in a way. Like, all of them are. You can't say that they're not, because you're not just, otherwise you're a stranger. But even strangers can make the biggest impact, because strangers eventually become friends, depending on who they are. You want them around, so there you go. And I can say that for firsthand. My husband actually is adopting my daughter. And so, just because there's no biology, that's a choice. He said, I'm going to be your dad. And I see it the same way with friendships. You're my brother, Like, you're my sister, whatever the case may be. My daughters see my best friend of 26 years and on. His kids are, to them, I'm Auntie Cynthia. And to, my daughter, that's Uncle Josh and Auntie Sevi. Like, it's those types of things. And they were actually, and I can give so much thanks to them. I went through hell and back. And Josh was a part of my journey, and he would, even as a kid, like, he would just say the wisest things, and I got lucky with him as a friend. Where I grew up in the hood in Eastside Las Vegas. I shouldn't be here. By the base, no, forget it. But I met him there, and we've been friends till this day. And his life wasn't the best either. We were just two kids that decided to make the best out of our situations. We both did well in school. I had a cousin who very similar upbringing than like myself. She grew up in a very tough spot where like her parents argued left and right. It was nothing but yelling. But we both had tough situations in different ways, and our paths were completely different. She would be kicked out of school. I was the goody two-shoes that could never do no wrong. I've only gotten detention once. But it's because I allowed those adults at the time in my life that invested in me. I did that. Here's the other problem, is that the people that want to be empathetic, especially in schools, they're not being paid enough to be bitten.
Yep.
They're not being paid enough to raise your kids, and it sucks that they have to. They're not being paid enough. Psychologists, I think I read a stat that the profession's declining.
Yeah.
Actually,
reimbursement rates continue to go down. Yeah.
We're getting this whole circle backwards. Old people are not taking accountability. People that want to take accountability can't do anything because people have to make a living also. But on top of, like, where there's so much intertwined with it, where it's like, even a simple I'm sorry and just changing your ways, it's hard to change, but just a simple like acknowledgement and understanding is fine. Or asking, just like we do at work, how can I improve? Like, I'll talk with, employers all the time about, the mental health aspect of things, and, talk with friends as well on how they can, when they feel frustrated with their employer or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, so what can you do in this situation to be better? And they're like, nothing, I don't know. Okay, well, you probably should. So from the employer side too, we're asking the employee to, hey, what can you do to improve? Well, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, you better figure it out because we don't have the answer for you. Okay, what tools and resources are you going to provide me to, help me out with this? You see someone that's doing so great and then all of a sudden they're declining. Let's say it's something at home. Older generation. Leave your stuff at home at the door.
Yeah.
But I work to support for my family. That does not make sense. It no longer makes sense. So how can you support me? Well, I'm just going to put you on a PIP. But I was top performer for an entire year straight, and all of a sudden I'm struggling with something. Yeah, you better figure it out because they're bottom line. So it's dependent on one employee. That's the other problem, is that we're expected for other people to take the responsibility that we choose not to take. And we are totally forgetting the whole, like, the human side of everything. It's a circle and it's a vicious cycle that people need to really own. And if you don't have that support, go find it. And I don't mean it in like a bad sense. What I mean is find someone that you admire. If there's a lot, reach out to them. Like, say, hey, I'm sure if they are worthy enough, in the sense where they are worthy enough of your attention, or if they actually care, they'll take the time to talk to you. Just take the time to find a person. If it's not a psychiatrist, find someone that you wanted to be like, or that you respect, or that you emulate, and have them earn your trust. and, you know, go from there. I feel like there's so many things that we can do to take accountability. But if the other people are not, then we're responsible for ourselves. And so we have to do something about it. And if we want things bad enough, we have to go get it. We have to ask for it. And I can say 100%, the vicious cycle of asking around is so frustrating and is so exhausting. But at the end, it's going to be worth it if you just take the time to do it and not scroll around on social media for useless information. Go with intention instead.
I mean, there's just there are so many beautiful things that you were saying there. It's an interesting time to be an HR leader because we need the humanistic element of life so much more. And the world that we live in, our personal lives and our professional lives, the line between those things have become incredibly blurred. I mean, like we're here in the studio, which is also my house. So it means like this is always here, but we all have the same experiences. And so my question for you is, I want to be able to pose a question that came from our last guest, and I feel like this is an amazing opportunity for me to do it. So her question was, what are some of the ways in which you can advocate and equip HR teams to be able to meet the needs of the future of business? And I want you to kind of think about the mental health lens in this question.
That's a very loaded question too. I want to say from the biggest standpoint is, this is probably far-fetched, but we talk about the future. And in my perfect world is if you offer benefits to your team, do the research as far as to the providers and that you are choosing to work with. Actually take the time. So whether it's Kaiser, whatever, but look at the ratings of some of the providers that are available top notch and be willing to pay for that. Be willing to pay for the care for your employees. Be willing to look at the data behind what they're actually living in. So if you're starting a business or if you're taking over a team, for a company, whatever, truly look at the turnover rates, truly look, like there's all of those things, but really study the why behind it. Spend time with the employees. One thing that I'm not seeing enough that should be happening more is the HR leaders themselves truly taking the time to meet with the employees that they support. And that needs to happen consistently way more than not. It's one thing to build, like in HR, we typically talk with stakeholders. But, and when an employee reaches out to us, it's typically like there's a problem or they have questions about benefits, whatever's available to them. And that's a reactive approach. But to be proactive, take the time to learn what the needs of your employees are. And you look at the generational aspects too. If right now, clearly the problem is mental health. So if mental health costs a lot, premiums are insane, takes a lot more out of our check, well, think about if employee would show up to work more if they had the health care that they need the first time and not have to worry about paying out of pocket for that premium. I'm not saying fully cover it. If you can, great, but really see the return on it and really see the value in that. Because if, mental health day, labeling it as such is one thing, but I feel like mental health day can be something completely different. I also don't feel like employees should have to disclose that they're mentally suffering. I think that causes a bunch of other problems. But truly make the investment on the back end and advocate for it. And in my opinion, you should be the leaders in of themselves, CEOs, VPs, higher level stakeholders, they really need to be looking at it. I also don't think that executives take care of your executives too. I think a few years ago after the pandemic started, we saw a very big executive, I think it was for Google actually, or some other big company, took a deep dive off a building. Don't just look at it from just your line level employees. Your executives are expected to work maybe 70 to 150 hours plus a week, depending on where you're at. Really think about what you're doing. When you do, the layoffs are everywhere. Bring the humanistic side of things. Like, really, if you want tenured people to stick around, I can tell you, my dad has been at the Mirage, now converting to the Hard Rock, for 34 years. My mom, another 20 some odd years. The reason why unions keep employees there, but you want to do it the right way. You do it out of pocket yourself rather than having to go that route. So start really having these conversations and see with what these employees want within reason. Obviously, someone's going to say, I want $1 million, like at the low, pay me $1 million for, whatever. But really see what other benefits can we offer you? What draw you when someone gets hired? I also think from the recruiting perspective, what draws you to a company? Is it the benefits? Is it the people? Were you referred here by a friend? Is it the mission with what we do? Like, what is it? Nowadays, they have to think about it. It's everything. It's not just the one. It's everything. Do you actually care about my family? Do you care about me as a human being? There's Glassdoor. There's all of these different places where people can talk about you. So really study that data and mean it. And pay for that stuff. If they can't afford it, if they can't afford to go see a psych, please do it. Like, please try to at least help. Like, do that. That's the least that you can do. And it's one of those things where I don't want to go along another 10, 15 years and be in a worse situation. I really want us to improve in this whole aspect. I think really, having a colleague of mine that I did work with at Best Buy commit suicide because the military told him 6 weeks for him to see a psych. And he's like, I'm really suffering. And he's telling them, listen, like, people need to hear. And it's because of situations like that where people don't want to say anything as well.
Yeah. And
so HR leaders need to be proactive starting now and starting later to figure out what these people, what their team needs, people that they're supporting, what their needs are. And then one of their metrics, I guarantee, will be amazing. Retention will be amazing. Their employee engagement rates will be amazing. Employee engagement is no longer pizza and free food.
Yeah.
That's not. Like, we need to stop doing that. Really, what do they care about? Healthcare is insane. You can even have Talkspace and all of these other resources, and the prices are still nuts.
It's interesting to me, as you were going through the examples of what brings you into the organization, you didn't mention pay one time. It's all the other things. And I feel like that's where we really need to focus on the future of business is all of the other things that support us as human beings are the things that are going to make the biggest difference. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to be in the situation financially. But if you can give me the benefits, the support, the engagement, the leadership, all of the things that we talked about, it makes all the difference in the world. As we kind of put, the ability for us to land the plane here, I want to give you the opportunity to ask a question of our next guest. So what do you got for our next guest?
My gosh. This is, honestly, I didn't really put much effort into this one because there's so much that I think that can be asked. And I guess I'll kind of add to what, I guess on the question that I was asked is what type of training should we commit to the leaders on how to handle this, on how to handle mental health problems, but even how to handle having those tough conversations with employees. I think a big part of also what we're going on today is that we're, the chef's Hell's Kitchen conversation, where the Gordon Ramsay aspect, where it's like people don't receive being yelled at. So how can you really, especially now going forward, how do you commit to training your leaders effectively? And let's say they don't manage people. How can we train other people to lead in a way that they are not officially leaders?
I feel like that's a beautiful question. And I can't wait for our next guest to be able to answer that. Cynthia, seriously, thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show.
you.
I really appreciate it. This is an awesome time. Being able to just kind of hear your passion for mental health, being able to be vulnerable enough to share your experiences. It was so nice to be able to kind of share your story with everybody. But seriously, thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really
All right.
appreciate it.
There we go, guys. That's a wrap. Check you on the next one.